Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast.
Hey there, Karma Crew. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Mind Your Own Karma, the Adoption Chronicles. Today I have Jetona Smith Milby on the show. She is an adoptive parent and an adoptee. So very interesting perspective today on the show. Let me tell you a little bit more about Jetona. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has been practicing for 16 years. Going by the moniker of Jet or the traveling therapist, she enjoys, surprise, surprise, traveling, animals, nature, dancing, reading, music, and astrology. Professionally, Jet works with individuals, couples, groups, and families, providing a variety of services ranging from therapy, life coaching, consulting, retreats, speaking, intuitive readings, and more. Although clients likely enjoy seeing Jetson, the company, pug the most. Occupying two positions within the adoption triad, Jetona is an adult adoptee who has been in reunion with her birth family for nearly 2 decades. She is also an adoptive parent to her son and daughter, both born in South Korea. Here is my interview with Jetona. Okay, so we are welcoming Jet to the show today. Hi, Jet.
Hey.
Jet is an adoptive parent and an adoptee, and I love the unique perspective. So I'm super excited to get into the interview with you. So let's just start with your adoption and tell us what you know about why you were put up for adoption.
So I was adopted at birth. What I was told my whole life was that my birth mother put me for adoption because she couldn't provide for me. Um, that that could mean so many things. So I kind of went my whole life wondering, like, well, does that mean financially? Does that mean emotionally? Like that question for an adoptee, just you hear the answer logically and cognitively, but connecting it with feeling and emotion, like, because I think there's really no answer that's going to resolve that question. I mean, because what answer can there be?
Right.
So when I was able to ask that for myself some years later, because I am in reunion with my birth family, my bio mother had said that she was in a disadvantaged economical situation. She didn't have employment that was consistent and had no intent to have a relationship with my bio father, and was a very practical decision for her.
Mm-hmm. So why did your adoptive parents decide to adopt? Do you know what the circumstances were?
I was raised in a small town. My whole life, I, certain phrases just kind of became commonplace. We knew we wanted a baby. We had had some problems. Um, and seeing the community, in this area or rural areas, that seems to kind of be the standard response when a couple is adopting, and you kind of just assume from that there's fertility issues, but you don't necessarily get detail. In my experience, most adoptions that I have seen happen have fallen under either fertility issues or a sense of I want to save a child through Christian efforts. So I was just told growing up that my parents had received, news that it could be a difficult process, and just knew that they wanted to adopt.
And so what was it like growing up in your adoptive family? Did you feel any different growing up? Did you know you were adopted?
I did know I was adopted. It was incorporated into maybe my bedtime story, because at this point I can't really say exactly when I heard the story, but it was a reoccurring story of the night they brought me home from the agency. And I knew all the details from that, which involved like my dad telling my mom she had to sit in the back seat, and they put my car seat in the front so he could have his hand like on my car seat the whole time. So like I remember writing stories about it as early as second grade because it was part of my portfolio. One of my portfolio pieces that was a big deal in one of those grade school grades. So like I always knew. There wasn't a definitive moment that I was told. I was kind of told my whole life. Um, I am thankful that my parents, did that. I have mentioned that to them before, and they say that's what the agency recommended. So I'm not sure that they understood really the full reasoning why that's so important, but they did heed that advice and let me know. I did always feel different. That might be a surprise to almost everyone that might hear this that knows me, unless I've had a private conversation with them. I I can't really explain why. I just always felt different. Um, and yeah, there are some memories that stick out as far as like it being specifically identified that I was adopted. I'm trying to account for those, and I would say even as those aside, I felt the differentness in my body. One example might be is everyone I've encountered in the town I grew up, it connects to being there and knowing that that's their roots, and there's no place like home. There's no place like, and then they'll, insert the name of the town. That never made sense to me. I actually felt very confused at a young age because I wanted it to make sense. Like I thought there was something wrong with me that I couldn't connect with, like why this town didn't feel so, important to me like everyone else. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of ways that I would feel different.
And so, did you have any siblings growing up? And if you did, were they adopted?
No, I grew up in my adoptive home as the only child, and still am the only child in that home, that family system.
Yeah. So then looking back now as an adult, when you look back at your childhood, do you see adoption playing a role in your behaviors growing up?
Yeah.
In what way?
I was a rebellious teenager. I did a lot of limit testing. Um, did not have awareness at that point. Um, Emotional awareness wasn't really something that was reinforced or emphasized or favored in my home or community, really. Um, I can recognize now that my teenage self was very depressed and anxious. But that wasn't noted then. It was
Right.
that I was hanging out with the wrong people, or people had influenced me, or that I was going through a bad spell as a teenager. Yeah, but it connects back to adoption and a search for identity.
Mm-hmm.
I think my first relationship was in sixth grade, and that I know that sounds young, but I remember that being so intense for me and thinking that like it was the person I was going to marry. That I loved them, and I remember we would fight and break up and then get back together. But as I look at that now, I would instigate the breakup and then try to earn them back. Um, and then I remember, I mean, that was probably it went on the whole sixth grade year. So like, when you're a 12-year-old, that feels like
A long time.
10 years. Um, yeah, I remember this right before the summer, let school let out, like that person said, like, I'm done, like we're not doing this again. And I remember that summer, I felt like, I think I cried every day. And I remember their birthday was in June, and I wanted to go like spend all of my money that I had saved up and buy them like this Nike chain for their neck. Because they like necklaces. And like I did that.
Wow.
And wrote a letter and mailed it. And I remember their mom made them, um, you know, I think write me back. I think I still have the letter. And that's something with adoptees too. We save everything. Like I've got boxes with all this stuff. Yeah, and he wrote me back over the summer in a letter and said that he thanked me for the gift. And I forgot the exact wording, but he made it clear that we were not getting back together. Um, and I remember like it just feeling like it was starting all over for me again. Like as
Mm-hmm.
far as like I'd lost something I could never get back, and just like the world was ending. And I remember 2 years later, before eighth grade ended, still holding that person in a certain kind of on a certain pedestal in my mind. I don't know that I connected like the significance of the undertone and the dynamics underneath of all of that with abandonment and limit testing and reproving yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that was a very strong connection for me, that even talking about this, I'm thinking about like the magnitude of that person in my life. And I mean, it makes sense. They were the first person. I mean, I would still say I think my 12-year-old self felt whatever love could feel like, which is also something I feel like is unique to adoptees. Like, I don't know that love is experienced in the same way it is for everyone else.
Yeah. How about as an adult, do you think, like, do you ever consider yourself in the adoption fog? Um, what did it look like and how did you come out of it if you do?
Yeah, I was in the adoption fog probably until the last 5 years. And that sounds so surreal to think about because I've been a licensed mental health provider for families and individuals and couples for 16 years, and was very aware of my adoption and could talk about, and even led adoption groups, like training groups for younger girls, by contract. So my coming out of the fog was really, I feel like, kind of like a process. Like I feel like I cognitively understood a lot that was there and it deep down. But I would say, as far as feeling the grief and letting myself like just pour it out and it be, is more of the last 4 or 5 years thing. Because I can think of definitive moments like my birth mother did find me when I was 20. um I was a college student at the time, and I remember we would have lunch dates, and I remember she asked me, feel like she thought she was kind of doing her due diligence to ask me I had had any adoption related issues. And um, I remember being in her car and saying, "Oh no, I've had a good life." Like, yeah. So once again, kind of a disconnect. Like, cognitively, I could tell you all the things that like happened that were very significant about being adopted. And I knew that that was like part of my core self is as an adoptee. But I don't know that anyone I ever had met at that time understood. Um, it's still hard to think about that because I remember when I turned 30, so that was 10 years after we met each other. I wrote my birth mother a series of questions. It was kind of like my 30th year birthday present to myself. Was I felt at that moment having the courage to ask some things I'd always wanted to know and was really hard to say, even out loud. 30 was a turning point in my adoption, but it still wasn't what I've experienced in the last 4 to 5 years. It was a coming out of the mist, maybe. But the fog still kind of was there because I recently looked back at those questions and was shocked that my 30-year-old mind had even conceived of those things to that degree and asked them. Um, so there was still some disconnect there as far as, yeah.
What do you think brought you out of the fog? Was there a certain thing or?
When I when I adopted my children, it was a matter of circumstance at the time that did not originate with me. It was, to my knowledge, the only way I would become a mother, if I was with the person I was with and had been with for 12 years at that point, maybe. There's a lot of stuff even within that. I remember begging and pleading with my then husband, to not, if he knew me at all, to not make that the standard for which I would become a parent, because I didn't know that I would be able to know what my children were feeling the majority of their lives. And it was kind of minimized and brushed aside. I know their father said something very casually about, why don't you just adopt? Most adoptees, when they hear that, it's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I remember having a response. I'm doing the timelines in my head right now. So I was 27 at that time. So that was about 3 years before that 30th birthday. So that's probably what necessitated those questions when I turned 30. So there
Mm-hmm.
was some work being done when I adopted my children that I, I I could not place my finger on, but there were very real feelings I was having and just didn't understand the intensity. And exactly the origin and how it all connected. So to answer the original question, coming out of the fog probably really started, I'd say around my later 20s was probably the start of it. And then of course, here I am right at a little over a decade later, and it's as strong as it's ever been.
Yeah.
Feel like I'm out of the fog now and like advocating,
Yeah.
to others for the first time from a place of not worrying primarily about how my truth is going to affect my adoptive parents, as well as my birth mother, which is what I've done my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally understandable. We all do it. Um, were you kind of questioning your ability to be a mother to an adopted child because you were adopted?
No, I think I always knew that be I would be a good mother. I was wanting to avoid feeling pain and feeling their pain.
Yeah. How old were they when you adopted them? Because you got them from Korea, is that correct?
Yes. My son was 17 months and my daughter was 21 months.
Wow. So older. Were they in an orphanage or?
They each had, so their adoptions were 2 years apart, and they had each had a separate foster parent, that had kept them, and I think only I'm pretty sure neither of their foster parents had another infant in the home at that time. Um, for the first like 12 months to 18 months is as long as it was required for all the paperwork and things to be complete before you could travel. Because I received my son's referral picture at 9 months old, and my daughter's at a similar point, like 10 months maybe. So
Wow.
it took, you know, the paperwork side of things took
A
a
while.
while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were they relinquished at birth? Do you know, or
Each of their stories are different.
you don't have to share those if
But
you feel like
yeah,
it's their story to tell. You
yeah,
don't need to, but
I don't want to share their stories, but in each situation, I think it was a decision that the birth mother felt she had to make right away.
okay. Did you see, or how was it? I mean, because they were older, so taking them from their country that they've kind of, even though maybe cognitively now don't remember, I don't know how old they are now, but um, did you see adoption trauma when you brought them over? Yeah, I can imagine at that age.
Yeah, so that was before I really started coming out of the fog, and I felt things, but they weren't connected. Cognitively, I read all the instruction manuals and would joke that, like, well, I could have written this manual, because everything made sense. Couldn't get my then husband to read the manual,
Yeah.
which was also, I remember, to me, amusing, not amusing. It's just like, humor, something that I think a lot of adoptees use to cope, um, or just kind of a sense of like your own sanity is being questioned. Like, because I remember thinking, of all the people that need to be reading this manual, like, he needs to be reading it. And
Yeah.
then, like, I remember my parents would passively kind of like talk about the process. And now at this point, like, my birth mother was in the picture as well. She had opinions on the process.
Mm.
But like, none of them read the manual. I read the manual and I already knew like everything in the manual. So, um,
Why do you think that is? Do you
because
think people just go ahead?
they they don't want to know.
That's what I thought too. Yeah. Yeah.
That they don't want to hear anything other than what their thoughts already are about it. And that's pretty much on any topic in life. But I think adoption's like one of the only topics I can think of where people's inability to want to hear anything that's different than what their narrative is something that intrinsically affects a person's life on such the level that adoption does, because it is their whole life. It's their identity. It's something that in most cases like starts, at birth, or at a younger age. I know that that's not always the case for everyone, but a lot of times there's trauma in the background somewhere, whether it's brain trauma from separation or just, you know, I don't know that I can think of anyone that's adopted that trauma doesn't precede their story in some way.
Hmm. What do you think when someone says to you that they know an adoptee and that they're just fine and about being adopted, or they think they know the adoptee perspective in some way, shape, or form, and they aren't even adopted?
That happens a lot. What do I think or what do I say? I forgot
Either
the
one.
first. My immediate thought is they're lying to themselves, or you're lying to yourself if you're like the adoptive parent. Someone's lying to someone, and someone might not even know they're lying because they may not even realize it. But like, no, that doesn't happen. Like, as far as that, that's not reality, that adoption doesn't affect or impact someone.
Yeah. Well, like you said
No,
earlier, people in your life might be surprised at hearing your interview today because they have had no idea you were feeling a lot of these things. Um, it's just something that you just don't blurt out and share with people, you know? So that's why people don't know because we
right.
don't feel
Well, when
safe
you,
sharing it.
yes, because when you do share things, it gets reinforced that it's not safe to share because they don't like their narrative challenged. I mean, I was asked to speak at a religious function once during adoption month, and
Oh
I
boy.
mean, I could feel the different vibes from the crowd because I was
Yeah, it's
like,
like, what
well,
version do you want me to tell? The
yeah,
truth
well,
or the
I
Disneyland
asked
version?
the lady that asked me, I said, well, what are there limits on what you want to hear? No, whatever God places on your heart. I'm like,
Okay.
okay, well, let's buckle up. And,
Did you?
yeah, I talked about the adoptees perspective, and I felt that it wasn't received by everyone, which is another thing. I feel like our guts are very strong, our gut response, but we've also been conditioned to not listen to it or not even hear it in some cases over and over and over again. I definitely felt like not everyone liked what they heard. And like now at this stage in my growth process, like I can definitely believe that my intuition was right on that. Like,
Yeah.
because that's not, people are uncomfortable with information that makes them uncomfortable. So if it's new information, as in it's something that's different than what their cognition is about it, or their schema, or their narrative in their mind, like the brain will resist the message, like in
Yeah.
different formation, like, and then like a person's overall like disposition towards being open to new knowledge. It's another thing a lot of adoptees seem to share in common is a lot of them are curious about things and
Hmm.
learning and the unexplained. And that might be because we've searched for meaning in our own life. and connection our whole lives in most cases without having answers. But most of the time, people that don't necessarily want to be challenged in their thoughts are the same people that they don't want to hear anything other than the Disneyland version of adoption, which is that it's, a happy thing, and that it makes a family, and that, you know, the birth mother did a good thing and she helped people, and a couple were able to save a baby. Like,
Yeah. Yep. I want to back up a minute and talk about your reunion. You've been in reunion for how long now?
18 years.
And how is that going now? And how about your paternal side? Do you know that side too?
It's going well. Um, there's been a lot of challenges over the years. Part of that, I think, too, is my search for wanting to know I was wanted, and having a birth mother that would always just present very logically about things and the decision she made. And recently really kind of coming to like understand that so much of that is her process, and that like I am okay um myself, which is a kind of a new thing. But in that case, my birth mother is a person that, as I was looking back over those answers from like 8 years ago recently, like it's kind of like taken aback at how cognitive the answers were. I think my question was, what was labor like with me?
Mm,
As an adoptee, like wanting to know, like, were you anticipating seeing me? Were you wondering about me? Did you want to hold me? Like,
yeah.
and the response was, um, well, my water broke and then they had to start this and then I don't remember much then. And it was just
Mm,
all these like factual details and numbers, and like nothing that was like connected at all.
wow.
And there was another question where I'd asked, like, why did you make the decision? Like, I was pretty impressed with my questions. I was like, you were onto something at 30, but I was very cognitive. So, like, the questions were good, but like now reading back at them now, and I'm like, that I'm feeling things more, I'm like, oh, dang, like, you're your body knew and your brain like spit the question out, but like now you can appreciate the answers more and what they say. Like,
Yeah.
when I asked about, um, like, did she know she was going to, you know, place me for adoption? Did she ever question that or second guess that during the pregnancy? All of those things. Like, the response was, I knew immediately. Um, my religion taught me that, pregnancy out of a marriage was a sin, and you know abortion was a sin as well. And this was her response. um and this is reflective of her 20-year-old mind at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it said that there were a few times that she would walk by storefronts that had little girl clothes in them when she found out it was going to be a girl, because she did find out, and her heart fluttered a little. And she said she shut it off because she knew it couldn't be.
Mm.
And that she remembers sharing with her father she was pregnant, and she said she remembered this is what was in her response, that she remembered he was a little disappointed and that had hurt. So yeah, I read those recently and just yeah, just it felt a little different than I feel like I remember it feeling 8 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of being more out of the fog. I'm looking at that situation and I'm thinking, like, how do we even say that birth mothers like make a choice when there's so many factors that are present that
Yeah.
do they make a choice? I mean, and I think I've even said a few things to her since coming out of the fog, and like she'll even double down on almost like a Socratic dialogue where she'll like come back at me like with, because I think I told her one day, I don't know that there's any case where if a birth mother received adequate supports that, she would make a choice to like not parent her child. Like,
Hmm.
that's, and she was adamant about, well, some people weren't meant to be parents, and you could see that with abuse and everything. And
Does
I don't know,
did
these
she
are
ever
new.
have any other kids?
Yes,
She did. So
she,
you have
mhm,
siblings, have
yeah,
siblings.
and yeah, she was, I don't know, just even that, like, as a therapist, seeing in her response a lot of cognitive programming, like even if it's self-programming,
Hmm. Survival.
very, it's very deep,
Yeah.
and and most likely reflective of what was built then in that moment to be able to make it through and keep going.
Hmm.
um but obviously for me, very devastating over the years,
Yeah.
to try to
Sounds
manage.
like, I don't know. Was it more like, I don't know if I would call it expectations that you had not met, but maybe more like needs that you had not met by the birth mother because of her trauma.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, until recently my expectations, and this is interesting because cognitively I let go of the idea a long time ago that she could meet those expectations in any capacity, like maternally. um but still that feeling piece was lagging. But recently I was able to reach a point, that is interesting too. When I finally reached those points in certain relationships, like it really is like, okay, finally felt this. The nerves finally connected, like that vagus nerve or like something in that gut brain, like it finally like got it and felt it. Like I know I won't have any more issues now with that to that degree, because I think I have seen and incorporated enough to realize like this isn't about you, Jetona. Like you weren't. And I knew that logically, because I think logically we know as babies, we we don't do anything wrong to not be wanted,
Yeah.
but it's still a core like,
Still feels
but
that way.
yeah, but why wasn't I kept? So
Yeah.
um yeah, recently I've been able to yet feel that no, it's not you, and that feels really good. It released myself. Yeah, but before then, a lot of expectations. And no matter, going back to that sixth grade boyfriend, it's like continuing to throw yourself out there to like just be shown that like they're not, like, you're throwing them the ball, but they're not catching it. And you're like, why aren't you catching it? Like, and I think that goes back to like, we try to solve stuff because we've been trying to figure out our own,
Yeah.
our own self forever. So I think like to see that some people aren't trying to figure it out, like they're just okay.
Yeah.
Like most of the time those people aren't adoptees, but yeah, like just I marvel at, I want to live like that in all ways at some point. Well, not totally disconnected, but
Yeah.
um yeah,
What advice would you have for adoptees that are thinking about going into reunion?
that's tough. Because obviously with my own children, the subject of adoption is always an open door, but it's not just an open door, it's a door I will open over and over for them because I am happy my parents, you know, made adoption something that definitely I we talked about a lot when I was younger, but then I felt like maybe in teenage years it didn't get talked about. And internally, I know that I struggled a lot not feeling like I had anyone to have me. Um, so for that reason, with my kids, like I'm coming to them all the time and like, I know your birth mother probably is wondering about you right now, or, she is on birthdays, like I know she's probably thinking about you, or you thinking about her. Um, that's normal. Like I I say the things I that I've experienced and that I would feel, but I clarify them as that. Like, I would think like that sometimes. And this is a frustration with the world because I've had a lot of people suggest that just because I've had issues with my adoption doesn't mean that my kids will. So I shouldn't over project onto them. Now that's frustrating, especially at this point in the game, because it's like, I don't know that any adoptee has ever been hurt by having adoption brought up over and over for them to speak if they want to. Like,
Yeah.
there's like, that's not doing harm in my mind because it goes back to this idea that like just because the person's not talking about it doesn't mean it's not there. So
Right.
it's and I know
Yeah.
that, I believe that in my core. So going back to the question, I know now that there was no way I was prepared at 20 years old to meet my birth mother in the condition that things were. Um, so in an ideal world, two adoptees, I would probably in the same way I would encourage clients before we dive into exploring trauma. I would want them to assess their support network. Um, what does it look like? Who's included? You know, do you have someone or multiple adults that feel safe, for the times through this process that might be challenging, like no matter what it is? Because I don't know that there won't be challenges. Like, even in an ideal situation, like I still think about how, my birth mother found me, which is something that a lot of us like, that's the ideal. But there were still so many challenges because I think her expectations were so different as well. And it there was not communication about things, the misunderstandings about what we each seen each other as, positions, roles, like that's not terrain that can be easily navigated without a lot of support. Like,
Yeah.
because I think about all the times that as she would start to want to meet with me and take me places, and then the cancellations would come and I would just loathe, like in my dorm room, and just cry and tell myself that, I had messed something up or I had done something wrong. And I believed that. And I didn't talk about it because I couldn't, like, there was no one to talk about it with that I thought would understand. So I think about my age and also just other factors. But if I had to say one thing, like the support, like I'm sure there could be 20-year-olds that would have a different experience based off of whatever their resources were at the
Yeah.
moment of support. Um, Professionals that were adoptees that could navigate things and help them. Um, Coping skills, that are healthy. That's the advice I would give to adoptees that are considering reunion is I know there's a sense of wanting to know when you've for most adoptees, like our life won't feel complete in some ways until we do have answers to some degree. And even then, maybe that too is managing expectations to know that a reunion doesn't take away the pain and the trauma, and it doesn't reconcile everything.
Yeah.
And depending on how it goes, sometimes there's more that comes to the adoptee's mind.
Right.
That's a hard risk. I think most adoptees would connect with knowing that there's a lot on the table when you're thinking about a reunion, because I had already in my mind thought about finding her when I was of age in my state to look for her, and have access to my records potentially, but she found me first. So like
Yeah.
I'd already considered it and knew like there's a huge unknown and a risk there.
Yeah. Yeah. Reunions can be definitely a bumpy ride. Expect the unexpected for sure. What would you like struggling adoptees to know?
That there is a world of people that do get you. They're there. Like that they're there. Like because knowing they're there means that, like, okay, now we can find them. I don't know until I stumbled upon the adoption community as far as, so many adoptees that had done the work and had come out of the fog and were speaking about things that my soul had felt my whole life and no one had voiced. Like there is no sense of connection that's higher than that. Um,
Yeah.
but what came with that was, oh my goodness, you all exist. Like I thought I
Hmm.
was like an alien all by myself. Like
Yeah.
seriously. So struggling adoptees, like just that there are people that get it, and it's worth your energy to make sure that you're doing what you can to connect to them or find them, because if they haven't already, because that I think makes a world of difference for all adoptees. Like it may not take care of everything, but it's a huge thing to have that validation of knowing that they experience the adoption part of like that they're an adoptee. They get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you are a therapist, so tell us about that and if you have any websites or social media pages where people can find you.
Yes. I run my LLC, which is the traveling therapist. I go by my nickname of Jet. So sometimes my handle is Jet the Traveling Therapist. On Instagram, it's the Traveling Therapist LLC. My email, and I forget how Instagram does it, but it you can find me at Jet underscore the Traveling Therapist. I think that's how it's set up on Gmail.
Okay.
Gmail is Jet the Traveling Therapist at gmail.com. Instagram is Jet underscore the Traveling Therapist LMFT, or the account is the Traveling Therapist, comma LLC.
Well, we'll
And
have all those links in the show notes. So
I'm accepting clients. You can find my profile on Psychology Today, Jetona Milby, and I am accepting especially clients that represent the adoption triad. Priority goes to adoptees first, but I have professional and personal experience with working with every triad position.
okay, great. So we'll have all those links in the show notes if someone wants to get a hold of you. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. Like I said, I love having that unique perspective of having two legs of the triad and just kind of listening from that perspective. I think it kind of opens eyes to some different things. And so just want to thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. It was good to be here.
You know, Jet may be an adoptive parent as well as an adoptee, but her adoptee voice, I think, speaks the loudest. And I think she would agree that out of all three legs of the triad, that the adoptee is the one that has the least amount of voice, and that really we need to step up and start telling our stories. And as far as reunions, you know, we've talked about reunions many times on this show, and each story is unique and complicated. And if I could just say three things, if you are thinking about starting the reunion process, number one, get your resources in place, whether that's a therapist, whether that's friends, whether that's fellow adoptees, a best friend, a spouse. Get those things in place ahead of time so that you have someone to go to and talk to about your thoughts and feelings through the process. Number two, I would say expect the unexpected. Try not to have expectations because things come up that you may not have thought about in the beginning or even wanted to happen. So just be aware of that. Lastly, be kind to yourself through the process. Take it slow, check in with yourself, see how you're feeling, and just be as authentically you as you can be. That is my advice. If you are struggling as any part of the triad, get in touch with me. I have a list of resources for you and can guarantee that you can find something that will help you on this list. As always, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.